Aldo Leopold's argument for land ethic. So who was Aldo Leopold and what did he do? Aldo Leopold was an American author, philosopher and a scientist. He was born on the 11th of January 1887 and died on the 21st of April 1948. He was mainly interested in maintaining orderliness and harmony in the environment. In 1909, he graduated from Yale University in forestry. Soon after graduating, he began working for the US Forest Service, so conservation was his job and not just a hobby. Throughout his life, he also wrote extensively on the topic of wildlife conservation with his best-selling book, A Sound County Almanac, selling over 2 million copies. In 1924, the first protected wilderness area was opened in New Mexico under his operation. In 1933, he began teaching at the University of Wisconsin. He lectured about ecology and game management, and it's also the year he published his first textbook. Leopold was the first person to become a professor of wildlife management. His work on biodiversity and understanding the full biotic community has been hugely influential. In 1935, he founded his own wilderness society where he continued to investigate ecology and the philosophy of conservation. So what exactly was his argument? The argument of land ethic is one of the key proposals of Leopold. But what does it mean? To begin with, Leopold's aim was to move away from the anthropocentric view of ethics. But what does this really mean? Well, anthropocentric is the belief that human beings are the most important beings or creatures in the universe. And ethics is the field of philosophy which studies moral principles and aims to discover how we can act morally. And so, Leopold argued that all entities within the universe should be treated as equally. We shouldn't prioritise the well-being of humans simply because they are human. And so, to demonstrate this, we can think of you or I as having the same value as a flower, for example. And likewise, the flower has the same intrinsic value as a caterpillar. And Leopold would also argue that the caterpillar is just as valuable as a rock. So what does this all mean? Well, Leopold argued that we should redefine our idea of community, and he said our definition of community should be expanded to include all living and non-living beings. All members of the extended community should be treated with the same respect. So we should consider the well-being of all creatures and structures when making a moral decision, and not just people. And this is because people and nature are intertwined. We depend on one another, and we cannot live without each other. So we cannot show care for only one party. If we care for people, we should care for nature and vice versa. Leopold famously said, "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise." So how can we understand Leopold's argument? Well, firstly, we can think of it relating to people and nature. So as human beings, we can agree that we live in social communities. And within our social communities, we aim to treat all fellow group members equally and morally. However, we are also a part of an ecological community. An ecological community consists of all living organisms as well as inorganic structures, which Leopold refers to as the land. And therefore, The way in which we interact and treat our social community should be mirrored in how we interact with our ecological community. So, how does this affect our duty of care? Well, the consequences of our actions do not only impact people, but also other members of the ecological community. If we consider the well-being of people when making moral decisions, members of the larger ecological community should be considered in the same way. So, in our everyday lives, we should not only consider how our actions affect other people, but also how they affect nature and the land in general. So how can we use the theory of land ethic in practice? The first thing we can do is to be more considerate, more thoughtful and mindful. We should attempt to be more mindful of how our actions affect the environment and consider the possible consequences of the actions that we take. By being more mindful and considerate, we accept that our actions do not only affect people, but also other parts of the ecological society. And we can do this by employing sustainable practices in our everyday lives. Another thing we can do is change our understanding of the world. In order to accept land ethic, we must also understand that we are not superior to nature. In fact, we depend on it for our own well-being as much as it depends on us. We are part of the ecosystem and not the rulers. And because our actions can have immense consequences on other parts of our ecological community, it is even more important for us to consider ourselves as equal to any of the other parts of the ecosystem. And the last thing we can do is educate. Educate others about the importance of the environment. Encourage others around you to let go of the harmful anthropocentric views of the world that many of us hold.